The desert sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the golden sands of Giza. Beneath the layers of centuries-old dust, hidden in the labyrinth of ancient burial grounds, lay a tomb that had not seen the light of day for millennia. Yet, in the year 2024, a team of archaeologists would uncover its secrets. Dr. Emily Rayner stood at the entrance of the newly discovered tomb, her breath shallow, her pulse quickening with the weight of the discovery. The tomb was not on any map, not documented in any ancient records. Its existence had been lost to time. A group of Egyptian archaeologists working on a nearby excavation site had stumbled upon it by accident while digging for a different burial chamber. The discovery had sent shockwaves through the academic world, and now Dr. Rayner, along with her team, had the honor of exploring it further. As the team descended into the tomb, the air became noticeably cooler. The temperature inside was a stark contrast to the blistering heat outside, a chill that seemed to seep into their bones. They moved cautiously through the narrow corridor, the dim light from their torches flickering on the walls. Dr. Rayner's heart raced, not just from the excitement of the find, but from a feeling that something was off. It was as though the tomb was holding its breath, waiting for them. The walls of the chamber were covered in intricate carvings, but not the familiar hieroglyphs one might expect. These were different. The symbols were warped, twisted, and alien, as if they had been scratched or burned into the stone by some unseen hand. The language was unrecognizable, something older, something more primal. The air smelled stale, almost metallic, as though the tomb had been sealed for far longer than the excavation team had estimated. Dr. Rayner knelt before the sarcophagus, her flashlight illuminating the strange markings etched across its surface. The lid of the sarcophagus was heavy, and as they attempted to lift it, an eerie sound echoed through the chamber, like a deep, resonant hum. It was a noise they couldn't explain, almost as if the tomb itself were alive. "Ready?" Dr. Rayner asked her team. Though her voice trembled slightly, there was an undercurrent of fear in her tone, one she couldn't entirely control. She had studied ancient Egyptian history for years, had uncovered the secrets of countless tombs, but this one felt different. With a collective breath, the team lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in layers of tattered linen, lay a body, perfectly preserved, unlike anything they had ever seen before. The mummified figure was that of a woman, but her features were almost completely obscured by layers of black tar, thick and glossy, covering her face. Her limbs were contorted into unnatural positions, as though she had been forced into a state of eternal torment. The body was rigid, stiff, as if the mummification process had been interrupted, or perhaps deliberately altered. Dr. Rayner's hands trembled as she reached forward, pulling away a section of the tar from the figure's face. The moment she did, the temperature in the chamber plummeted. A sharp, cold breeze swept through the tomb, causing everyone to freeze. The air felt heavy with dread. The face beneath the tar was unsettling. It was human, yet distorted. The skin was stretched tight over the bones, giving the face an almost skeletal appearance. The eyes, though closed, seemed to have a hollow, unsettling quality to them. Dr. Rayner instinctively recoiled, but she couldn't tear her gaze away. There was something haunting about the face, something otherworldly that gnawed at her mind. "What in God's name is this?" whispered Dr. Harrison, her colleague and a renowned Egyptologist. He had seen countless mummies in his career, but nothing like this. Before Dr. Rayner could respond, one of the junior archaeologists, Marco, shouted from the back of the room, "Dr. Rayner, come look at this!" She turned quickly, her heart racing. Marco had been examining the walls, and now he was pointing to a series of strange symbols. Symbols that were etched deep into the stone, running in a circle around the sarcophagus. The symbols didn't resemble anything she had encountered before. They were not typical hieroglyphs. They were warped and jagged, like jagged teeth. An abstract form of writing that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. "Can you translate them?" Dr. Rayner asked, though she knew the answer. "No," Marco replied, his voice tense. "But they're definitely not Egyptian. These look like something else entirely." The discovery was both thrilling and unsettling. Dr. Rayner stepped forward and began examining the symbols herself. As she traced her fingers over the marks, she felt a shiver run down her spine. The symbols seemed to vibrate beneath her touch, as though alive. It was then that she noticed something else. A subtle crack in the stone, barely visible at first, running along the floor. Her eyes narrowed. The crack was not natural. It seemed to be man-made. Kneeling down, she pried at the stone and, with a soft scraping sound, she revealed a hidden compartment beneath the floor. Inside, there was a small object wrapped in cloth. Dr. Rayner gently unwrapped it, revealing an obsidian mirror, smooth and flawless. The mirror was about the size of her palm, its surface as black as the night sky, with a faint sheen that seemed to distort the light around it. It was ancient, older than anything she had ever seen before. Her heart raced as she studied it. There was something profoundly unsettling about it, as though it were not just a piece of craftsmanship, but a vessel for something far darker. When his consciousness awakened, he had to watch himself, make sure not to blink or even take a nibble of food. She could feel a strange pull toward the mirror, an almost magnetic force drawing her closer. Without thinking, she reached out and touched the surface. The moment her fingers made contact, the air seemed to change. The temperature dropped further, and a low hum began to resonate through the chamber. A flicker of light danced across the mirror's surface, and for a brief moment, Dr. Rayner saw something not of this world. The vision vanished as quickly as it had come, but it left her shaken. In that instant, she felt a deep, gnawing sensation in her gut, as though she had glimpsed something forbidden, something that should have remained hidden. "What the hell was that?" Marco's voice cut through her thoughts. Dr. Rayner looked up to see that the rest of the team had gathered around her, their faces pale. They had all felt it, the shift in the air, the strange energy that had filled the room when she touched the mirror. "I don't know," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. But I think we've just uncovered something far older and far more dangerous than we ever expected." As she set the mirror down carefully on the stone floor, the strange energy in the room seemed to intensify. Dr. Rayner's breath caught in her throat as she realized that they were no longer alone in the tomb. A sudden bone-chilling wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing their torches. The darkness pressed in on them, suffocating and oppressive. Dr. Rayner could feel her heartbeat quicken, her palms clammy with sweat. The whispers began, soft at first, like the rustling of dry leaves. Then louder, more insistent. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere, filling her mind with foreign thoughts, strange images, and a sense of urgency. "Get out!" one of the team members, David, shouted, his voice shaking with fear. "Something's wrong." But it was too late. As Dr. Rayner looked around, she saw the mummified woman's body twitch, then slowly shift. Her limbs began to move, not as though they were being manipulated by an external force, but as though the body itself was awakening from a long slumber. The mummies in the surrounding tombs, those that had lain undisturbed for centuries, began to stir as well. A low, rumbling growl filled the chamber, and for the first time, Dr. Rayner realized that the mummies were not simply the remains of the long dead. They were something else entirely. They were not just preserved. They were bound, trapped in an eternal state, holding something within them, something that had been imprisoned for thousands of years. She stumbled backward, her mind racing. "We've awakened them," she muttered, her voice hollow. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the ancient forces stirred. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as though the very tomb itself was alive, aware of their intrusion. The howling winds from the unseen surface of the gulf grew stronger, a sure proof of the great long black period before the ensuing massacre had taken place. Dr. Rayner's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the terrifying truth. This tomb, this burial site, was not a place of rest. It was a prison meant to contain something far darker than any of them had ever imagined. And they had just unlocked its gates, the truth beneath the sand. The winds howled through the corridors of the tomb, drowning out the sound of Dr. Rayner's breath, which had become shallow in her mounting panic. Her fingers tightened around the obsidian mirror, which now felt like a heavy anchor, pulling her towards some unseen abyss. The temperature in the chamber had plummeted further, and the whispers had grown into an unintelligible chorus, reverberating through the stone walls, as though the very tomb was alive, suffocating the air with ancient, hidden voices. Dr. Rayner stumbled backward, her heart pounding against her ribs. "We need to leave," she muttered, but her voice sounded hollow, as though she were speaking underwater. The rest of the team stood frozen in shock, their eyes wide with fear. Marco clutched a torch in his shaking hands, his face pale, as he stared at the mummies that were now moving, not with the slow, jerking motions of the deceased, but with a chilling, deliberate motion, as though the bodies themselves had been revived from their unnatural slumber. The mummified woman, the first they had uncovered, twitched again, her fingers curling into grotesque claws. Her eyes, those hollow, tarred eyes, began to shift beneath the black film, as though trying to focus on something in the room. The mummies surrounding her, once motionless, now seemed to come to life in unison. Slowly they began to rise, their bodies stiff but with a disturbing sense of purpose. "Stay back!" Dr. Rayner shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos. But no one moved. Fear had frozen them to the spot, an invisible force that seemed to paralyze them. But the first time, Dr. Rayner felt something truly unsettling, an awareness from the mummies. It wasn't just the bodies moving, it was as if the souls inside them were beginning to stir. There was something more, something dark and ancient, stirring in the tomb like a beast coming to life after millennia of confinement. "What are they?" Marco whispered, his voice barely audible over the rising whispers. Dr. Rayner couldn't answer. The truth was beyond anything she could have imagined. Her mind raced, trying to piece together what she had uncovered in the tomb. What was it about this place that felt so wrong? Why were the mummies moving? What had she touched? What had she unleashed by picking up that mirror? The whispers seemed to grow louder, becoming more distinct. At first they were incomprehensible, but slowly they began to form words. The serpent, the prison, the eternal weight. The words came from all directions, overlapping each other in a maddening symphony of voices. Dr. Rayner's vision blurred as the whispers became a chant, one that seemed to reverberate through her very bones. She felt dizzy, lightheaded, as though the tomb were draining the life from her. The air was thick with something ancient and evil, that seemed to press in on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw something move. One of the mummies, the one with the tar-covered face, was beginning to open its mouth. It was impossible, but there it was. The tar seemed to shift, parting slightly as the mummy's jaw cracked open with an unnatural groan. The sight of it was too much. Dr. Rayner took a step back, her eyes wide with terror. She raised her hand to shield herself from the sight, but it did nothing to block the horror unfolding before her. Slowly, the mummy's mouth opened wider, and from within, a low, rumbling voice echoed out, reverberating in the chamber. "Release the curse." It was a sound unlike anything human, a hiss, a rasp, a deep, resonant growl, like the sound of a serpent's hiss. Only, it felt older, more powerful. The words weren't Egyptian. They were something else, something primordial. Dr. Rayner's knees buckled and she collapsed to the floor, her mind reeling from the words. The curse? Was this part of some ancient ritual? She couldn't process it quickly enough, the weight of the moment crashing down on her. "Dr. Rayner," Marco's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up to see him, wide-eyed, holding the mirror at arm's length. His face was pale with fear. "The mirror. Something's happening to it." Dr. Rayner's heart skipped a beat. She turned her gaze to the obsidian mirror, and for the first time she saw it clearly. The cracks that had marred the surface had begun to glow with a faint, pulsating light. At first it was barely noticeable, but then it intensified, growing brighter and more erratic, as though the mirror were alive. It cast shadows across the room that seemed to writhe and twist, as though reaching out for something from the depths of the earth. "No." The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. The mummies, the strange symbols, the whispers, everything pointed to one terrible truth. These mummies had not simply been buried. They had been preserved, yes, but they had also been trapped, not in death, but in a state of unlife, bound by some ancient, forbidden ritual that kept them from rising. The mirror wasn't just a relic, it was a key to unlock the curse that had bound them, the curse that had kept the god Apep sealed away for millennia. It had taken 7 sacrifices, 6 months of prayer, 500 years of labor, 19 weeks of meditation. She staggered to her feet, reaching for Marco. "Give it to me," she said, her voice rough. "We need to put it back. Now." But Marco's hands shook uncontrollably, his fingers tight around the mirror. He looked at her, his face contorted in fear. "What do you mean, put it back? What's happening? What's going on?" Before she could respond, the ground trembled again. This time it wasn't just a slight quiver. The walls of the tomb cracked, and dust and debris began to rain down from the ceiling. The air was thick with tension, like a storm ready to break. The whispers, once soft and indistinct, had now grown into a cacophony, a maddening chorus of voices. They spoke of something ancient, something terrifying. "He returns." It was a single phrase, but it seemed to echo through Dr. Rayner's mind, as though the tomb itself was speaking directly to her. Suddenly, a violent, inhuman scream pierced the air, louder than any sound she had ever heard. The mummified bodies around them began to convulse, their limbs jerking violently as though being pulled by invisible strings. Dr. Rayner's heart raced in her chest, and she grabbed Marco's arm. "Put it back, now! before it's too late. But it was already too late. A low rumbling sound echoed through the tomb, like the growl of an ancient beast stirring after a long slumber. The air around them grew thick, charged with an unnatural energy, as though the very fabric of the tomb was starting to tear apart. From within the cracks in the walls, strange shadows began to form, dark, serpentine shapes that writhed and twisted, as if they were alive. The temperature in the chamber dropped even further, and Dr. Rayner's breath came out in visible puffs. She could feel something massive, something ancient, stirring in the darkness. And then, from the depths of the tomb, came the unmistakable sound of a door opening. "Hattie!" Dr. Rayner's eyes widened in horror as the ground beneath them began to shake. The rumbling grew louder, more intense, as though something, or someone, was moving beneath the earth. "The serpent awakens," came the voice again, louder this time, as though it were speaking directly into her soul. The ground beneath their feet cracked wide open, revealing an abyss that seemed to stretch into eternity. From the depths, a dark, serpentine shape began to emerge, its eyes glowing with a terrifying, unnatural light. It wasn't just a creature, it was a god of chaos and destruction, Apep, and he was rising again.